This is SharpShot21. Welcome back to the mini Mania series. Today we're going to, this little section, see if I start this off or not, but working on the head of the engine. I've already done some work, just wanted to get the technique down off camera, and, wanted to get you guys a comparison. We're relapping the valves because it appears that we had a carbon buildup problem instead of a timing problem. This was only discovered after we got the engine completely apart and pressure washed, which we did also off camera. Once we had the engine pressure washed, we noticed that we were getting water leakage through the valves both on the intake and exhaust, all 8 of each. So all 8 intakes, all 8 exhausts had water leakage. This was kind of expected due to some observations I had prior to us pressure washing the engine. Now, with that being said, there's a compression issue. This compression issue, by the looks of what we found when we took the valves out, and sadly I didn't remember to snap a picture before I cleaned them all, was a significant carbon buildup problem, which I'll try to show you on the runners to the valves, both on the intake and the exhaust side. There's some heavy buildup there, like more so than I've ever seen on any engine anyone's ever taken apart. Like, this should not be. Part of this, I took the umbrella seals, which are these little guys, off of the valve guides. I'd say about half were full of oil, which is the exact opposite of what one should find under a valve seal or an umbrella seal like that. There shouldn't be any oil under those. Their whole job is to keep the oil from going into the intake track on the intake side. On the exhaust side, their job is to keep the exhaust gases on the exhaust side. There's going to be a little blow-by on that side, but a lot of cars don't even have umbrellas on the exhaust. The other thing with this car, because it's a turbo, you have manifold pressure on the intake. So you're also trying to keep that pressure in. You don't always have manifold pressure though. Sometimes you have a manifold vacuum. That's when the umbrella seals do their job. Them being full of oil showed us that they'd failed. That was allowing oil both into the intake tract, which oil, as we all know, captures dust and debris. So any burned carbon that's recirculated through the intake, of which there is some, found the oil, built up on the sidewall, built up on the valve, built up on the valve stem. There was a lot. Let me grab an intake valve here. On this intake valve, hopefully you can see it, there's kind of a blackish line, and then there's some discoloration up to here. From that black line to basically the sealing edge of the valve was caked with carbon like that. There was a huge arc of carbon all the way around. And then from here to about there was even more carbon. Just a wet, sticky, solid mass of carbon. And there's a bigger pile in each of the runners. So what that means is the carbon was preventing the valve from closing. The exhaust side was very similar. Not quite as much carbon buildup, but the carbon on that side was significantly harder than the carbon on the intake. This is due for a couple of reasons. It's the exhaust, first of all. So we've got high heat already. And then there's a turbo. Turbos get exceptionally hot. Turbos are right next to the engine. That heat radiates back up through the exhaust header into the block. That's going to bake it on, especially when, and granted, this car does have an auxiliary water pump specifically for the turbo to help cool it off after you've shut the car off. But if you shut the car off without letting the turbo cool down, you have a massively hot object right next to your engine. As such, things are going to bake on there. You don't have the engine's water pump running to pull heat away and vent it through the radiator. You have a little auxiliary water pump doing that, but just for the turbo, not for the block. Hot block, really hot turbo, things bake on, things get really, really hard. So that's what we're looking at. When we go through lapping the exhaust valves, they take a little bit more time and consideration than the intakes, again, because they're on the hot side. They're made of slightly different alloys, and the valve seats are made of slightly different alloys than that of the intake. The intakes are usually a little bit softer. I usually only have to go 2 or 3 times on an intake. On an exhaust, I'm having to do between 6 and 10. I'll show you what that means here in a second. But right now we're going to go take a look at side by side of a good lap and one that is yet to be lapped. We'll also compare the mating surface on the valve and a couple other things that we found inside the head now that we've got it taken off, because there has been some damage, but we're not quite sure where it came from. Now let's take a look. Alright, so on the right you'll notice that there's a grayish ring just beneath my finger. That ring is the lapped area of the valve seat. Now if you look on the left, there is no such ring. It's kind of golden and discolored. There's some carbon deposits on there still. That one I haven't done yet. That's my next task. If you take a look at the intakes, you'll see that they're still rather shiny, whereas the exhausts are on the dull side. Again, that's due to the heat of the exhaust gases passing over the valve seat. Those ones we're still going to lap in, but they're going to go faster than the exhaust. Some things that we've noticed while I'm here. We have a nick right there where the head gasket goes. We have another one there on the valve, or on the mating surface for the piston. We have one on that exhaust, or on that spark plug hole. We've got another one right there. This one's okay. The number 4 cylinder, on the other hand, a couple of big gouges there. I'm not sure where they came from. Also, you'll notice these ones, numbers 3 and 4, are a bit dirtier than numbers 1 and 2. Numbers 1 and 2 I cleaned out with carbon choke cleaner, and this is important, a brass bristle brush. If you're going to lap any valve, not just ones on this car, you're going to need a couple of tools. Among the tools you will need is a valve stem lapping tool. And they're dead simple. They're 2 little suction cups on a wooden dowel. This is a small one. Here's a big one. This big one is way too big for this engine. I mean, hello, the small cup is the size of the valve on the intake, which is the larger valve. You also need, not necessarily Napa brand or Permatex, but you will need valve lapping compound. This is grease and fine particulate. I'm not sure what this one is. My guess would be some type of carbide. And a lot of paper towels. Now this valve is one that I've finished lapping. You can see that gray area around the rim of the valve. It's fairly consistent all the way through. That's what you want it to look like when you're done. That valve is done, and I've marked it as such on this box over here. Once you lap a valve into a valve seat, they're mated. So you can't go swapping them around. You gotta know which one goes where. Now, this valve is the last one to do. I want you to look at what it looks like when it comes out. See how it's a dark ring, kind of splotchy, almost pitted, where it meets the valve seat? That's no good, because that means there's variation in the surface height. That causes your valve not to seal. So lapping is going to remove that, get this nice and flat, and get the seat nice and flat. That's all you got to do. Lick your thumb, get a little spit on the tool, attach the valve to the tool. I've got a little flat blade I'm using for putting the lapping compound on. But you just want to go with a little dollop on two sides here. So we've got some there, we've got some there. And that's it, and we're going to do this a few times. Line the valve with the valve guide. Don't force it, you don't want to scrape the guide. I'll spray this out. As I did do some scrubbing, so there might be some hard carbon in there. Alright. Now I want you to listen when I start. It's going to sound very coarse and grinding. And then it's going to smooth out and become less raspy. When it becomes less raspy, you need to change your lapping compound. See how it's very coarse? And the motion you want to do is a back and forth. And I hear how it's smoothing out. So we're starting to get through the usefulness of this batch, but you can pick it up, twist it, and set it back down, and get a little more life out of it. I'm not putting much pressure on this at all. I mean, I can do this with my fingertips. But now, see how it's really smooth? That means it's almost time to change it. I'm going to pop a couple more. Alright, time for a new lapping compound. Careful that you don't, when you're pulling out, you don't get any on the valve stem. Because again, you don't want to mess up your brass valve guide. They're very sensitive. And they don't have much in the way of tolerances. They're supposed to be tight. So you wipe it off the valve. I like a different towel for this one. Wipe it off the seat. And if you look, starting to get that gray area, but we still have some black spots. Those need to be dealt with. So we keep doing this until they're all gone. There's a little bit of an art and a little bit of a science to this. So I'm going to fast forward through this. Fast forward through the intakes. And catch up with you here at the end. This time around, it is looking at what the intake and exhaust runners look like. Now, this head has some serious carbon caking. As you can see, those runners are black, and if you look at the shadows, there is a ton of carbon buildup in those runners. Now that is the intake side, and I'll move around here and we'll show you the exhaust. And they are the same. Now, how do we deal with this? A couple of different ways. The big one is either walnut or nitrogen blasting, and that will remove that buildup. So after this video is done, I did walnut blast the runners in that blast cabinet, and that's where it put us. Thank you all for watching. I hope you enjoyed. If you did, please hit the like and subscribe buttons. It really helps me out, and it lets you know when I put something new up. New videos will be going up on Tuesdays or Thursdays at 8 a.m. Eastern. And if I do decide to do live streams, I will try to give 24 hours notice. So hit the subscribe button on the channel, and you'll be notified when I post that stuff too. Hope to see you next time. Sharps out.